Welcome to my studio. I'm Wendy O'Brien. Thanks for dropping by. Today I'm going to take you step by step on how to create a realistic apple using colored pencils. I will first start with the background and then I'll move on to the apple. If you don't want to do the background, then go ahead and jump right into the apple section of this tutorial. You can find the reference photo and the line drawing on my Facebook page, Artista365. The link will be down below. So without further ado, let's get started. Now this is a 6x6. It's just a small study. You can do this larger if you like. All the supplies I used for this tutorial will be listed down below in the video description. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to identify the different colors of not only the apple but also the background, since I am doing the background. I like to work back to front as far as how you view. So I like to work the background and then I'll move into the midground and then I'll move into the foreground in most cases. Some cases it will change. For this case, I am going to do the background first. So if you want to skip the background and just jump right into the apple, then feel free to move ahead. I do encourage you to do the background, especially if you're new to colored pencil. This will help you learn how to layer and blend your colored pencil, since it is a very nice gradient. So the first thing I do is I go in and identify the different colors that are within the different sections. And then I choose my colored pencils beforehand. This way I already have a palette established. I tend to pull out more colors than I end up using. So don't be afraid to pull out those colors, and then as you work and you decide that they're not layering as you want them or the colors aren't working, then just set those pencils aside. That's not a problem. Everybody says that colored pencil is not a forgiving medium. I totally disagree with that, because within the first couple strokes you can pretty much know if it's the right color for that area or not. So if you're doing light layers like I'm going to show you how to do, then you will find that you can make adjustments and hide, so to speak, those layers or those colors that you do not like at first. So I'm going to start by choosing the light umber, which is kind of a mid-tone in this drawing. And I'm going to just put approximately where this is going to go. I am going to identify around the apple and where that apple ends. I'm also going to identify where that color is going to be around the outside of my circle. I did block this into a circle. This way I'll have a nice smooth edge. I'm only doing the area that that color is going to be. And for my first layer, I'm gonna go very, very light. Notice how I'm holding my pencil quite a bit to the back. This is a shorter pencil, so it's harder to tell, but I'm going to use the back of my pencil and I'm just going to put a light layer of color in the background. I am using circular I'm not going straight up and down. I am using a circular motion. This is a longer circular motion. Again, I'm just lightly blocking in the color. And if you use light layers like this, it's easy to make adjustments. If your colors are just off, clearly if you're going, say you put black and it's supposed to be white, that's not going to quite work because you're not going to be able to make the adjustment. However, you know, if you're just off like a couple tones, it's really easy to fix. Okay, so there's a white area there, or a lighter area is what I should say. Let's come straight across, so we'll go here and here. Continuing on with the same process. Next up, I'm going to take my ginger root, number 1084, and I'm going to go into this lighter area very lightly. Notice I am overlapping because this is going to be a gradient, so I want to make those areas overlap a bit. Okay, next I'm going to go in with the Beige Sienna, number 1080, and I'm going to put in right about to here and right about to there. Again, just overlapping these colors. I don't want a harsh line. Next, I'm going to go in with my dark brown 946. I'm going to start to define this top area. Let's see. Just annotating where I want this color to stop. I'm not outlining I am outlining the apple, sort of, but I'm not making it harsh. I'm just outlining it so I know where to stop my pencil so I can see it better. Okay, then this is going to, again, I have my pencil held near the back of the pencil. I don't want a lot of pressure on this. Now I'm going to use smaller circles to come up in this area so I don't go on the apple. The reason I like to work in this manner is you don't get halos. And if you work in the background, if you think about putting things together, if you start with the background, then you layer something on top, right? So then as you layer, you're going to be able to make those transitions and gradients a little bit easier instead of coming back later and try to get that background behind the subject. I mean, you can do it that way. It's perfectly acceptable. You can, work in whichever order you like. This is just the way I prefer to do it because I find it's easier to get those nice, smooth looking areas. You don't get the halos, and it just seems to be a little bit more cohesive to me. And for some mediums, if you happen to just like go slightly into the apple or something, right, then because it's light layers, you can fix that when you go over it. So next I'm going with 947 Dark Umber. Just gonna put a little bit of that up in here. Now, if you want to make a different background, if you're putting a background in, you can certainly do that. I like the colors that it has in the background, so I'm just going to go ahead and use what it has in there. Okay, I think I'm going to go ahead and go in with the 935 black and top this circle off. Now this is the same manner I will work in the apple as well. I will block it in lightly like this, see if I like where the colors are, see if I like, you know, the direction it's going, the colors I've chosen, and then I will make adjustments accordingly. Because I can get a pretty good idea here of the desaturated appearance of what this background is going to look like. If I need to add more colors, things like that. Okay, so the bottom part is a little bit different. It has some texture to it. So I'm going to start with my light umber again, number 941. I'm going to put in here where this is going to go. Now this, I don't want as consistent because this is, it's kind of bumpy down here. Almost like a bokeh type feel. So I'm not going to make this as consistent as up here. So I'm going to have gaps that will be filled in. The bottom I'm going to make more consistent because it is blurred, but then when I get closer to the top up here, I'm just going to not have a straight line, just have a few gaps. Then I'm going to take my Putty Beige 1083. I'm going to go in here and fill in some of that. And you don't want to go on the shadow part of this. I'm going to put a few spots in here. Going back in with my light umber, and right on the other side of the shadow is some of this color. Notice how stagger and non-conforming that is. There's a lot of ups and downs. Now, I'm not putting, now, you could consider this a little bit of detail, but it's not detail per se. I'm just putting in the different values in the different areas to remind me, number one, that it's not very smooth as I work, and also to get in some of those darker values. And I'll make the adjustments when it gets closer to time. Now I'm going in with the Beige Sienna 1080. I'm putting in this. I am leaving some gaps in between. Okay, now for the shadow area, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going with 70% warm gray, 1056. And I'm going to define some of this grayer area, darker shadow. I can go ahead and define where this apple is with this color. Now I'm going to go in with the black 935 and really pay attention to where this really dark value is. There isn't a lot of it underneath the apple. It's directly under the apple. There is a gap right here on the apple, so make sure you pay attention and leave that gap there. It'll help form the shape. And the reason why this is really important, because this is going to really show and highlight where that light is. On the left side, it pretty much ends here, but on the right side, the dark actually extends quite a bit out. So that right there, just looking at that tells me the light is going this way, right? Because the shadow is actually on this side. The longer shadow is on this side. Now I'm going to use my 90% warm gray, 1058. Going to transition that into the lighter. I'm going to bring that out just a little bit, not too far. And you can see how it's already bringing it together a little bit. Now is the time to evaluate, do I have the right colors in place? Are the shadows in the right spot? What do I need to add? What do I need to subtract, etc.? So the thing that I am seeing in the reference versus what I have here is I'm missing some green. There is a green in there. So I'm going to take some Artichoke, 1098. And I'm going to put some of that green in here on the underlayer and see if that improves what I'm looking at and if I like it. I am liking that. It's adding much more depth. This side doesn't have too much. It does have a little bit in this corner, so to speak. So just to bring it into the other side, I'm going to put a little bit there. There's not a lot in this transition, but I think there is a hint. So I'm just going to put a nice little hint in the middle of this transition. And as we add layers, it will pretty much more or less disappear, and we can always add a little bit more in, but I do want a little bit up here. And let's see, is there any, there's a little bit down here in these little textured areas. Before I put more color on, I'm going to take this French Gray. It's number 1068, 10%. I'm going to put these highlights in these different areas. Okay, I'm going to go back in with Putty Beige 1083. And now I'm going to start layering my different values. Within the piece. So look at your reference. And just use light layers. Ginger root 1084. I'm using very, very light pressure. And right now I'm going up and down. I will go sideways on the next round to fill in more of that paper texture. This is Bristol Vellum paper, and I chose this paper basically because of the apple. That's why I chose this paper, because the apple has, or this paper has a really good texture for this particular apple. So I wanted to use this paper and utilize that texture to my advantage. And once we get to the apple, you'll see what I mean by utilizing it. You can already see where there's a lot of texture in here like this. That is what we're going to use to create the texture of our apple. Beige Sienna 1080. Again, you can layer this any way you want. In any order you would like. I'm just layering it like this. Now that I have the main colors in, I'm liking the way the gradients are starting to look. I am going to add some purple in this area, but I'm going to do that when we get into the details because it's going to be more of a glazed color over it. So now I'm going to take my black 935 and I'm going to start working up here. I'm going to go back and forth in a horizontal direction. We want to make sure our pencil is pretty sharp. Now this will give you a more defined line. So make sure you fade this out into this darker area here. Again, I'm still using very light pressure. Then I'm going to take my 90% warm gray 1058, start just above that line. Just bringing it down. Trying to make sure we don't have big gaps in the paper. Like down here we have some pretty big gaps. Like up here, right in here is a very big gap. So we're trying to fill that in so we have smaller gaps like this right in here. You can achieve this by using a very sharp pencil and smaller circles. Next, I'm going to use 947 Dark Umber. Again, overlapping. To get a nice smooth gradient, you want to make sure you always overlap the previous colors. You can see how my strokes have gotten much tighter. Now also make sure as you lay down your colors to twist your pencil as you work. You want to turn it so you try to keep it as sharp as possible for as long as possible. I'm still keeping very light pressure. The reason I'm going down closer to the edge of the pencil is so I can have more control as to where the pencil is actually going, but I am not creating more pressure. I'm still using very light pressure just because I don't want to go over the stem and things like that. Next up, I'm going to take the 941 light umber and I'm going to add that value into here. Again, overlapping up in this area. Going in with a bit of Beige Sienna 1080, and I'm going to go over this area here and this area over here. Take my ginger root 1084 and start going up in here. Now you'll notice as you are overlapping, these colors are starting to blend. I'm not using OMS with this project, which is odorless mineral spirits. I'm not using that with this project. This is a complete blending of your pencils in their raw form. I'm constantly looking at my reference photo to see where I need to add. I'm just using it as a guideline for this background. Going back in with the Beige Sienna. And then I just kind of make adjustments as I go. reason we don't want these large gaps is when we burnish, we don't want to have skips and jumps in our background. We want a nice smooth background. So we want to make sure that we have as much of the tooth filled in as possible beforehand. This actually goes all the way down. Okay, I'm taking some ginger root. There's really no ginger root on that side there. And then I'm going to take my artichoke, because there's quite a bit of green tint in here. And notice I'm just tinting it. I'm not really adding a lot of pressure. I'm just tinting the color that's there to add that nice green appearance. Now I'm going in with Beige Sienna 1080 right underneath that area there. Okay, now we're starting to get into where we have a lot of texture, so to speak. So because of the way that I'm working, I'm going to take and work some of the lighter areas first and a bit of the darker area. Let's see, let's do a bit of black raspberry 1095. There is a bit of a dark line right in here, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in now. And there's just a very slight hint of that here. And then I'm also going to put some black raspberry down here. Underneath the shadow. And this black raspberry needs to be above the light light or white or colors. This will give it the three-dimensional depth that we're looking for. And just look at your reference to see where you need to put this. I am seeing a bit of this artichoke color right on the back of the apple right here in the background. Light Umber 941. And start putting in some of these textures. And this one here is right above the shadow. I'm going to take a bit of Putty Beige, fill in some of this area here. I jump around quite a bit when I'm doing this. Ginger root, and this just gives me a better idea of layering colors. Okay, now I'm going to take some 10% French gray. The important thing is that you have pencil on all of these different areas before you, much like OMS, it's good to have it on there when you go to burnish as well. And take a bit of black grape 996, and I'm going to put that right on the very edge of the shadow. And this grape will also keep the black from looking so flat. So next I'm going to, looking at the reference, so this got a little bit brown up here, so I'm going to add either the gray or the putty, I'm not sure yet when we get down to it, to make it a little bit less vibrant. We want to desaturate it, and then it also help push it back a little bit. So I'm going to take the black, and I'm going to use medium pressure this time and start smoothing all of this out. Bring it down a little bit using slightly lighter pressure. I don't want a complete medium pressure bringing it down, but a little bit heavier than the light pressure. Next, I'm going to take my dark umber, 947. I'm going to go over my dark umber area. You'll notice as you overlap, not only are you mixing colors, you're filling in the tooth of the paper and it's starting to get smoother and smoother. Okay, I'm going to go back in with my black, and I'm going to bring the black down into this area before I burnish. The reason I'm doing that is this area is darker. I want to make sure that we have this nice dark value represented in this area. And this will give a nice black brown appearance. It won't be completely black, so it's not going to be flat. It'll look very nice. Going in with my dark brown, 946. Get this nice transition, this area. medium pressure. Still overlapping. I'm going to use the 10% French gray. I'm going to go over this area here. Pretty much blending this out more or less. Okay, now over the French gray, I'm going to take a bit of ginger root. Remember, I'm just using this as a guide, the reference. So I am changing the colors up just a little bit. A little bit of light umber, 941. a bit of beige sienna. Okay, so for this part from here up, I'm pretty happy with as far as how the colors have laid down. I want to work on this separately, so I'm going to go ahead and burnish this area here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the colors that we've already been using to burnish. I'm not just going to use one specific color. In some instances, I may use the gray or another color, and I may adjust the colors as I go. So right now I'm going to start with my black. And using about medium hard. You don't want to go hard because you still want to produce some of that tooth, but you want it to be just hard enough to fill in all these little gaps and blend. So these are going to be very small circles. And you want to try to have a sharp pencil as well. Clean up this edge. So I'm holding it about the middle of the pencil. That way I'm not pushing too hard and I have more control. When I get into these tighter areas where I need a more definite line, I get closer to the end of the pencil, the point or tip of the pencil. But otherwise I try to stay pretty far back. Now because we did layer brown underneath this, it's not going to be completely black, but we will also put some brown on top of this. Okay, next I'm taking my dark umber 947. And I'm going to work the next area. But I am going to, so what I'm doing here is I'm doing a medium pressure. And when I go into the black, I do a slightly lighter pressure. To help blend it together. And because I'm going over the black, I am bringing some of that black down into this darker brown area. Now you get the same results with any pencils with this technique. It does not matter. I do the same thing with, I layer the same way with Luminance, Polychromos. Granted, it's not as many layers with the Prismacolor because it is a waxy pencil, but you still layer pretty much the same way. Okay, I'm going in with some Putty Beige in this area. I want to get this blurred effect. Notice when you're going over this with a medium to medium hard pressure, it pulls your color in. You can really see how it pulls your color. Then I lighten my pressure as I go up into the darker area. I'm going to go up just slightly farther than I want it to be, and then I'm going to tone it again. Okay, I'm going back in with my light umber. I'm going to lightly go over this with a light pressure. Try to be consistent with your pressure, especially on this part, because this will help you get that nice gradient. There's quite a bit of pencil down here, so. Okay, now I'm going to take my ginger root and go over that as well. And pull it down. Going out to 10% French gray. I'm going to create this haze in this area. This out just a little bit. Notice when I'm blending here with this, I'm trying to stay horizontal. Because if you notice in the reference, it is quite horizontal. Take a bit of the Putty Beige. Just bring some of that in this area right there. There we go. Okay, so that gradient is pretty good. I could make a few slight adjustments. Look and see if there's any color adjustments you need to make before we go to the other side. I'm gonna make this a bit darker here. If you're happy with it, then go ahead and fast forward to the other side. Okay, so now we're going to do the same thing on this side. So I'm starting out with my ginger root. doing circles right here to get this nice variegated appearance. Okay, now I'm going to go in with the 10% French Gray. We're going to blend all this out all the way down. Being cognizant of where we're at and when we get to those gradient areas where the two colors combine, we want to make sure that it doesn't end up being a harsh line. So we just make sure we use the circles and bring it up. Like down here, we're going to use circles, right? And bring that color down. The darker color will come down. It's looking pretty good. This is a little bit rough up here, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make my adjustments with that. I'm going to do a bit of dark brown. Light pressure, just going over this area. Just to smooth it out just a bit. Okay, now I'm going to go in with my light umber. Take my Putty Beige. I'm going to lightly blend that out on this edge right here. And I'm going to take my ginger root and finish lightly blending and toning. You can see how it kind of fades a little bit better. It's much smoother in here than it was before. Let's see, do I need to make any more adjustments to this area? I think what I want to do here is I want to tone just a little bit more. So I'm going to use my Beige Sienna. I'll go in here and tone some of these areas. Remember, if you're toning, you want to make sure that it's still a smooth gradient. Even though you're adding more color variation in the area, it still needs to be smooth. So you want to use the light pressure and just barely whisper your color over the area just to tone it. going to take my artichoke. I want this just a little bit more defined and green. Notice this is super, super light pressure here. But see how the color still is coming off it? It's grabbing it because I still have a little bit of tooth left. So it's still grabbing the color to add to the piece. Okay, on that artichoke, I'm going to go in with the light umber. And again, I'm just toning. And then I'm going to take my 10% French gray and blend that together. And there we go. So I'm liking that gradient. Now for down here. So we have quite a bit of color on here already. And the way that we put the color on here, you have all of these little variations and textures already. So what I want to do is I want to start in the lighter areas and I want to pull some of that color and smooth it out. And you want to go in the different directions in the areas as your reference. When you're doing this, especially with this part, you want to make sure you maintain some of these brighter areas. So make sure you use a sharp pencil for this. Again, trying to keep the lighter areas light. So I don't want to go into the darker areas too much yet. Okay, now that most of the lighter areas are pretty much defined, you can kind of see how there's like a dark line here. Well, we want that shadow there, but we don't want the harsh line. So I'm going to take my 10% French gray, and I'm going to go over that, and I'm going to do circles to blend it out. I don't want to blend it too far. I want to blend it within itself. Because the point of this area is not to spread the color, it's to just blend it so it's nice and soft. Okay, so now for this one, notice on the reference there's like little, that's why we put little lines here, right? So we want to spread it out just a little bit, but not too far. And we can make adjustments when we come back in with details, when we come back for details. And this is what I'm going to do for all of the areas now, because we want them nice and smooth. Now don't push too hard, because we want to layer the same colors we put on here. We want to layer them on top for all the details, because it's nice and vibrant. It's not subdued like this background, but we want to blend them and make sure that everything is nice underneath, and then we will come back with the colors and saturate them a bit more, especially the shadow. I'm only using medium pressure here. If you have to go over it a couple times for it to blend, then go over it a couple times for it to blend. Don't use a lot of pressure. We need that tooth. Okay, now that that's done, now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to put in the values that need to be in the different areas. So I'm going to first start with my light umber. Now because it's already a smooth surface, so to speak, now that we semi-burnished, we are not going to have to worry so much about all those holes. So it should lay on, as long as you left some tooth, should lay on top just fine, especially if you're using a sharp pencil. So what we're doing right now is creating that depth of field that we see. Then I'm going to use just a touch of the dark brown. And create this dark area right here. Go around the shadow. Again, we're using our paper texture just like we're going to an apple in this area because this area is very textured. So we're letting the paper pick up the texture and letting the paper create it for us. We're just adding the different colors in the different areas. Now this front part is really important to get this texture in there because that really shows, because we start getting blurry again. So we want to make sure we get enough texture in here to show there is a depth of field here. And we can soften it, like this goes up just a little bit too high. That's not a problem. We'll soften it just a little bit. So we can do this back and forth thing. That is not a problem. Okay, so I did some other variations within this area down here, but then I'm going to smooth it out as well. Taking some black grape. Blend that down from the black area. Now doing some black raspberry. Again, right on the edge of this black. Going back in with some light umber, adjusting some of these areas in here. Okay, now I'm going to take some beige sienna. Bring some of that color down here, but I'm going to make it a bit blurry. Putty beige. So with this putty beige, I'm going to soften some of these little areas that need to be softened. Okay, so all of this from here up, 10% French gray. Okay, so all of this from here up is going to be very out of focus. I'm going to take a very sharp 10% French gray and only go over these brightest areas. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing down below. I'm not too fussed about the shadow yet. I'm not really working on the shadow. I want to establish these lighter values first. Burnishing this bottom area that is out of focus. Going to take my dark brown, add in different textures again. It's all about going back and forth and creating the look you want. Back in with my 10% French gray. Notice I'm just going barely going over it to keep that detail. And the area that I want to smooth out and have a brighter highlight, I just go over a couple times. That'll give us that out of focus look. For the actual shadow itself and this area here, so now we want to find a color that for this part here that is going to not highlight it too much, but we don't want to use the gray because it's going to desaturate it too much. So I'm going to choose Ginger Root. I'm only going over the brown areas. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on it. I just want it enough to smooth it out just a little bit. I still want that texture, but I want it to blend as well on the edges. So that's how I still have the texture. It's not quite as blurry as this back here, but some of the edges are a little bit smoother. It might be a little bit hard to tell. And I'm only doing this on the brown. Next up, I'm going to take the 90% warm gray. And I'm not going over the whole thing. I'm making little, almost like sketching type things, like uneven lines right on the edge. This is going to give those highlighted areas that you see. And this is 90% warm gray. I'm going to take the black, and the black is going to be pretty smooth, and it's going directly under the apple, just where the darkest areas are. If you're going to pull it out, like right here, use a light pressure so it doesn't get super dark. And then when you get back underneath the apple, you can use a medium to medium hard pressure. Again, keep your lines a little bit sketchy when you come farther out. You don't want a straight line in this instance. And when you come out over here, you don't want to go all the way to the back. The back is more of a brown and it has a lot of texture. You want to come kind of in the middle of the shadow. And that pretty much finishes the background of this tutorial. If you see anything you want to adjust, shapes, colors, anything like that, just use the techniques I showed you to do that. So I'm just going to adjust this. If you feel that your piece and background is how you want it, go ahead and fast forward to the apple section of the tutorial. I'm just going to make a few adjustments here and there to bring in some of these darker values and get more texture basically. And that pretty much finishes up the background of the apple. So next we're going to move on to the actual apple itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the stem. The stem, this is Deco Yellow. I just want to get this out of the way. Okay, this is Nectar. This color down on this side. And once this part is done, then we can concentrate on the apple and put the colors down as we need. Okay, I'm going to put down a layer of Crimson Lake. Just a light layer. Then I'm going to go in with a light layer of Terracotta. And we went in with the Crimson Lake to give it that nice red appearance. And then the Terracotta has a little bit of red, but it's more of an orange red. So we wanted to add that in. I am going to hit this side with some cream. And then a little bit of burnt ochre, just in certain spots. And then going back in just a little lightly with Crimson Lake. Make the yellow adjustment here with Deco Yellow. And a little bit down here. I'm going to take just a touch of dark umber and with a very sharp pencil just put just a little bit of detail right in here. And darken this up just a little bit right on this side. Going back in with Terracotta to go over that to push it back. There we go. Okay, next up we want to, when doing the apple, we want to look at not just the colors on top, but the colors underneath. So there's a lot of like yellows, greens, and things like that, but if you are unsure of the colors, you can always go over with a color picker. So there's all kinds of apps, there's all kinds of, you can use Photoshop, any of those, just go in with the eyedropper and you can just go over it and look and see what the colors are. What you might think is yellow may be more of a ochre, right? So you want to make sure you get the right values in there and trust, if you're using a color picker, trust your color picker, because even though you're like, well, that looks like yellow to me, but it's actually, say, a sand or something like that, because colors work off of each other. So just be sure to choose those colors accordingly. So, for instance, up here on the top area up here, it'd probably be, I'm going to work on the whole apple, but just as an instance, this up here next to the stem is a yellow. Notice I have a Deco yellow a little bit in the stem already on this corner. I did that on purpose. Number one, it plays off of the yellow that's right next to it. And it kind of gives me a jumping off point as well. So I'm going to kind of go all over the place. Now, this apple does have some striations, up and down or vertical striations. We want to make sure we work in that manner. We want to make sure that we have the striations in the right manner. We don't want a straight one over here because it goes with the apple. The apple shape is convex, or we want to go with the apple shape. We don't want it to go straight up unless it's in the middle, because if you notice in the middle it is fairly straight. It has a slight curve because when you're working in a circle or an orb, then it goes kind of in a like an eye shape, right? That's how if you were to do a wireframe, that's how it would be. It would be like this, right? This one would be this way, this one would be this way, and then this way, and then this one goes this way. So I make sure that we annotate that in the way we work. So when I work, I'm going to work vertically. Even up here, we want to make sure we get the right angles of these lines, because back here it goes straight, but then when you come over here, it starts going this way, right? So we want to make sure, again, that we get that in. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take some Deco yellow. There isn't a lot of it on here, but I'm going to put it right in this area here. And I'm also going to put just a touch, very lightly, because this is going to be an underlayer, right in here. Next up, I'm going to work with 10% French Gray, and there's a very light area. Make sure you don't have another color on your pencil. It's a very light area in here. It doesn't seem like it would be, it seems like it's white. It is not white, it is French Gray. And I'll put some on here. Okay, next up, underneath the red that's up here is kind of like a peachy nectar type color. So I'm going to go with the Polychromos cinnamon. I'm going to put that color in right in here. Notice I'm going over the yellow. The yellow is the undertone. The yellow is underneath this cinnamon color. Your color picker may not always pick out some of these undertones, so you have to use the combination of the color picker and your eyes, what you see, right? Because you're not going to get all the colors necessarily chosen in that area. I'm going to go with some light peach. Try not to bring that brown in here too much. So work out and wipe your pencil. Going in with some French gray for this highlight back here. Again, if you hit that brown, make sure you wipe your pencil. You don't want to bring it in the apple. And just smoothing out the brown. Okay, I'm going to take a bit of the Crimson Lake and paying attention to the direction of the striations. I'm going to put some of those in. Number one, I don't want to lose my map. And number two, I want to make sure that I have the correct values. Notice this is the same color. When I put it over here, it's darker. Over here, it's lighter because it's playing off the colors that are there, just like I was explaining earlier. So you have to really be mindful of what colors go where. And this is where I say make sure you pay attention to what your color picker says if you're using a color picker, or really pay attention with your eyes. This is a cream. So I'm taking the cream and I'm going to use it to pull this crimson red up. Notice how it pulls it up. That's going to happen again here. Watch. If you go up here, it'll soften it and pull it. And that's what we're trying to do here. If I want them darker, I can go in and create them again. So this is the Crimson Lake. Go back over. When you go back over, it sharpens it up again, but you have that nice undertone now. I'm going to take a bit of sand now and put that over on this side. Burnt ochre, very lightly putting in some more striations for the apple. And notice they're not all lines. They're yes, it looks like they're lines, but notice it's kind of in clumps too. So make sure you get the clumps as well. Taking on some light flesh to layer on this area here. Okay, so all I'm doing right now is cleaning up the edge. I chose the dark umber because it's a nice dark brown. I don't want the black. I I want to clean up the edge of the black because that's going to outline it. I don't want to outline it. So I'm just cleaning up this edge a bit. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to take a little bit of this pink. Put up in here. I'm going to take a little bit of this ginger root. Paying attention to the shape. I'm going to layer some ginger root. In this area. Notice I'm not covering the entire area. I am leaving gaps. I'm doing it very lightly because I'm going to go in with some other colors and make adjustments. And I also want to make sure that I get my direction, the right directions on these. Okay, notice that was very, very light. Next I'm going with a bit of sand right over that ginger root. It doesn't have to cover it completely, but... And then I'm also going to put it in other areas. Because remember, we're creating the undertones right now. As I am leaving open areas. This is going to give us that nice variation of undertones. That we're looking for. So I'm going to go in with the burnt ochre. I'm going to do the same thing in the shadow area. I'm going to pull a little bit up in here. Just looking at the reference to seeing what goes there. I'll put a little bit right in here. I'm going to use some yellow ochre. And there's some dots all over the apple. Don't have to be in the exact spot. I mean, it's an apple. Different shapes. They're not all perfectly round. Okay, now I'm going to go in with the Crimson Lake and start putting in some of these values, paying attention to the direction this goes. Trying to avoid those circles we just put in. Going to use a bit of Tuscan red for the darker type areas. Looking at the random little shapes in here. Trying to get some of that in here. Making sure to get a good layer of this down in the shadow area. go on with some Mahogany red. I'll adjust some of these colors over here. Okay, I'm gonna go back in with my dark umber. I'm just going to go over this Tuscan red in the shadow area only. So it gets nice and dark. Going back over that with more Tuscan red. Okay, so the shadow part is mostly done. We'll make adjustments as we need. Now I'm going to go in with the burnt ochre. Start getting some of these browny orange colors in here. So it's all about building up the colors. Just building up the different colors in the different shapes. Skipping around, this also helps you keep these open areas for the lighter colors. we're just using the apple reference as a guide, just to kind of get the colors, the actual design itself, the different little splotches and stuff doesn't have to be exact. And notice how the paper is picking up certain parts of the pigment but leaving parts of it open. That is what we're going for. This is not a completely smooth, polished apple, so we want those textures and whatnot to be created. Down in the shadows, it is a bit smoother. You don't see as much of the texture because it is in shadow. So we want that a little bit smoother. Then we want it to come out into this nice textured gradient, splotchy type appearance. Going in with some terracotta now. Notice I'm staying away from up here with a lot of these browns. The browns and the red browns are more on the bottom. Okay, I'm going back in with some sand. I want to make sure that I keep some of these lighter areas in here before I add more of the darker. Because I have the other colors on here, when I go over them, it'll pull them. So it's actually creating a nice layered effect, even though I don't, it's an easy way to layer the different colors without having to actually layer the colors, so to speak, in those areas. take a bit of yellow ochre. Again, going over these dots. Making sure we keep those in there. I'm going to go ahead and darken some of these yellowed areas up. You should start getting some apple texture. I'm going in with the Crimson Lake. And be quite generous with this. But I'm still looking and making sure that I have the right direction of my strokes. I don't want to go too hard. I want to keep the texture of the paper for the apple. So if that means I have to put 2 or 3 different layers, then that's what that means. And you can see how the color changes because it goes over other colors. It's blending and creating its own color. So notice how it's more of a red pink up here, but down here it's more of an orangey red. And that's because there is yellow and ochres underneath. Notice I am keeping it somewhat loose. I'm still not going all the way across. I get closer as I come down to the bottom because there's less color variation down here. When I get into these areas where there's quite a color variation, I do a lot of skipping. See, I'm kind of, I don't want to say scribbling, but I'm not doing a full coverage so I can keep layering the ochres and the yellows and all of that in these areas. I'm going to go in with Deco Pink. Right up in this area. Create some of the striations up here. And up in here. This highlighted area around the edge of the actual highlighted area. I'm going to take the 10% French gray. Go over these highlighted areas. Okay, I just noticed this light area here, so I'm going to darken that. There we go. I'm going to go back over with sand. And start getting some of these nice bright orangey yellow. Basically, I'm filling in the white of the paper with the sand, and then I'll go back over it, certain areas with the yellow ochre. go back in with the yellow ochre. Darken up the darker areas, the darker yellow areas in here. Because we're using the texture of the paper to create, you know how back here I wanted to fill in the texture of the paper. Well, now I use the red to create the gaps, and now I'm filling in with the yellow ochres and things like that, and that creates that texture. And you're going to have the color throughout the paper. You're not going to have white spots in the paper. You don't want that. You want the entire paper to fill with color, but in order to get this texture, you need to use the texture of the paper to create that for you. I hope that made sense. And because we used a lot of gaps when we put in our values and things like that, and we didn't fill in the whole area and whatnot, it automatically created that for us. So I'm of the belief to work smarter, not harder. And if I can have paper create part of the texture for me, then I'm all for it. Again, even as I'm filling in here, I'm still leaving the gaps because I can continue to layer all these different colors to get the look that I want. But if I just go over this whole thing with red or whatever, I'm not going to get those variations that I'm looking for. And I want those variations to create this apple. I'm going to go with some terracotta. Some of these orange brown colors in over here. Okay, so for over the terracotta, I'm going to use a Tuscan red. And for the Tuscan red, I'm kind of like, I'm not going up and down because most of the Tuscan red are like little splotches. So I want to be sure to get those splotches in here. This side is in more of a shadow, so I want to be sure to use more darker colors on this side. Okay, I'm going back in with some Crimson Lake. Watching my reference, deciding how dark I want each area. How much yellow I want showing. Okay, so just because this is the top of the apple, we don't want to neglect it. It's just as important as the rest. So I'm going to be sure to get the look we're going for up here. I'm going to take a bit of Artichoke and put in here as well. Gonna do a bit on this side. I'm just toning right now. I don't want really to see the artichoke, so to speak. I just want to tone some of these areas. Going in with some sand again. So essentially what I'm going to do with the sand is I'm going to go in and the parts that are yellow that shouldn't have white, I'm going to fill in all these little white specks, basically. A few is fine, but we want to make sure that we get the right values again. Like we want white specks in this area here because it's part of the highlight. The highlight comes down, but we don't want them down here because that's not where the highlights are. So if we do this with the sand and then just touch up with the ochre, we'll get some nice looking colors to this apple. I am using about medium pressure. Sharp pencil. Okay, for this white area, I'm going to use my French gray 10%. Notice we did not use white on this at all. There was no true white on this drawing. So there's no use in using white. It would just be too stark. As it is, that you can see where this gray is already very, very bright. It's a 10% French gray and it's very, very bright. And down here, I'm just going to add just a little bit. Bring it down just a little. Going to use some light flesh from Polychromos. Put that over in this area here. Down in here. A bit over here. Now it's basically just refining what we already have. So you may need to make different adjustments than I do. So look at your piece and see what you have. Do you need more of a certain color somewhere? Do you need to darken areas? I see that I need to darken mine overall, especially like right here, down here. But I did just go over a lot of this with the gray, so that's to be expected. So now it's all about that refinement. So now I'm going to go in with the Crimson Lake. Really pay attention to where this goes and how I'm putting it on here. I don't want to have to come back and put some of these colors back in if not necessary. I'm going to take, let's take some Nectar. Okay, and then I'm going to take my Deco Pink. Just define some of these lines just a little bit more in this highlighted area. Now going back in with some Crimson Lake. going in with some Tuscan red. Bit of yellow ochre, soften up these few lines that I find a little too harsh. I am going to take a little bit of dark umber and I'm going to darken this side. I'm just going to lightly glaze the color over it. And also on the bottom. Again, still paying attention to the direction. The lines are going on the apple. Okay, now I'm going to just adjust, soften up some of this brown in here. Just using the ochres, and then I'll get out the red here in a minute. Crimson Lake. And remember, if you didn't do this part, then you don't have to necessarily do this. I like to adjust my colors, soften up the harsher edges if I find I need to. Okay, one of the last things we're going to do, I'm going to take my craft knife and I'm going to scratch off where some of these spots are. Now that we have the spots, I'm going to take my yellow ochre. I'm going to color them in. Doesn't need to be a lot, it just needs to be able to see. I'm going to take my cream and put some highlights in some of them. And then I'm going to take my artichoke and put some, just a little bit of green in some of them. And I think I'll go ahead and take my Crimson Lake. Just going to go over a few of these so they're not so in your face, stark. There's something about it I'm not liking. Taking some sand and making the final adjustments, I think. And a bit of Crimson Lake. Filling in a few of those, not all of them, just the ones that I'm not liking. going to take just a bit of ginger root and fill in this little hole right here, finding that the gray is too stark. So I want to make it, do I have a gray? I do have a gray. Just darken it just a little bit. There we go. And that is about it. Don't forget to sign. Let's see, what color do I want to sign? I'll sign it. I hope you enjoyed the step-by-step tutorial. As you can see, you can create really good gradients and textures without using odorless mineral spirits. I know a lot of people don't like using it because it's toxic. I think there's a place for it, but I typically do not like to use it. Let me know in the comments below if there's a subject that you would like me to cover or do a step-by-step tutorial on. And until next time, keep on arting!